Hello and welcome to this week's episode of #Leadership What's on Your Mind. Remember, we're a podcast to make you stop and think about your leadership journey, and we're going to bring you every Wednesday at 6 a.m. some amazing people with amazing stories and experts in their fields. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe on that YouTube channel and make sure you hit follow on your podcast provider. So today we are speaking to Kerryn. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm really excited about this. I'm really pleased that we've had the chance to have you on. We've known each other for several years now. Whenever we meet up, we always have some great conversations about leadership. Just before we jumped on, I love the fact that you've been able to come on because you listen to a lot of the episodes, which I love. So that's one tick. But I think you're really in the thick of a leadership journey, and we'll dig into that a little bit about how, as a real interest piece, that you've taken on your roles that you've been in and how you thought, oh, I need to take that to another level and learn a little bit more about it, which we have covered on the podcast, but I love your specific take on it. So let's introduce you. So as I hit the 20-minute timer, if you could introduce yourself to anybody that doesn't know who you are and tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we'll get on with the questions. Off you go.
Sounds good.
Off you go.
Okay, so yes, I'm Kerryn, as you know, and I currently work for a large national charity as an Internal Audit and Risk Manager. I've only been in this role since June, but prior to that I had 15 years in the NHS. Prior to that I had about 10 years in the banking world. So a little bit of a diverse career, but needless to say, kind of one leads into the other, transferable skills between each of them. And I've always been in the kind of governance arena, quality improvement arena of some description.
Yeah, a lot more intelligent than my roles I've been in. There's a lot more reading involved in your stuff. So, fantastic. So we're going to dig into a little bit more about your experience and your thoughts on leadership and to the extent that you've dug into leadership. But to start off with, let's cover the question. What #leadership, what's on your mind? What comes to your mind when you just hear the word leadership?
So I've been thinking about this a lot over the last couple of weeks while we've been
talking
about this. And I think for me, what it actually stirs up is actually more about emotion than thoughts. And I think that's because when you think about, or when I think about leadership, the attributes that I think you need to have are things like empathy, compassion, nurturing, caring. And all of those words, I don't think you can say without stirring up some kind of emotion in there. And that then kind of leads on to empowerment as well. So it's about empowering people to be their best. And I think you need to be able to, like I say, have all those attributes to do that. And I certainly feel that I lead with emotion. I'm a huge empath. I will absolutely take on anybody else's emotion in the room, which sometimes can work to my disadvantage, because if somebody else is crying, I'll end up crying as well. And if somebody else is laughing, that's great. But what it means is that I can have that insight and that ability to be able to put myself in their shoes, to understand how they're feeling about a situation, the lens at which they're looking at something through. So it's definitely emotion, I think, is more of a thing for me than, well, that's what comes to my mind. It's the emotions it stirs up. So
I like that. Yeah. And again, when we've talked about the evolution of leadership, that's one of the key things that comes up all the time, that has changed from that industrial leadership and autocratic, and that what we sometimes, it's still in this day and age now, you still think of when you hear leadership. Some people have that power crazy thought, which is, I think it's changing and moving, but again, because of the emotion side of things coming into it. So excellent. So staying with you specifically, we asked people about where you think your leadership journey started, and let's see how we've gone quite far back on some of the guests recently. I've been really impressed with their reflection. So whether it was on reflection and I've asked you about it, or there was a light bulb moment at the time, like how far back can you go with the start of your leadership journey?
I think for me, it's going back to when I worked for Lloyds Banking Group, and we're sort of talking late 90s. So I'd have been in my 20s, and I started off as a mortgage advisor. I think I'm going to rack my brains. And then you kind of work up very quickly. I was aware of this kind of career progression. So you can then work up to senior mortgage advisor and then to assistant branch manager and then branch manager. You know, there was this very clear route. And from day one, I knew that I wanted to progress through that. And I did get as far as branch manager, which was great. You know, I mean, I was probably just about turned 30, I think, when I got that role. So that was definitely the start of the leadership journey, but I didn't recognise that as leadership because leadership wasn't a thing. You know, it was all the roles were managers. You know, and so whilst I was managing a team of probably 8 or 9 people, plus you know the branch, the bank, the money, everything that went with that, I don't realise it, and I didn't appreciate it because I didn't know what I know now, and I often think. Now I would love to go back and coach my 20-year-old self, and I'm sure I would do things very, very differently. And I did make mistakes. Now I can see that I made mistakes and there's things that I would do differently. But then we learn from those, don't we? So I wouldn't be who I am now if I hadn't have made the mistakes that I did then. So
So I've got a couple of questions there then. So I'm going to write coaching down quickly because I'm going to remind myself about that. So. Where you said you had that drive for the next, where do you think that drive came from?
That's interesting. I don't know where it comes from. I suppose my parents, I suppose, you know, my parents have always worked very, very hard. I've always strived to sort of get to the best positions that they could, be the best that they could be at the jobs that they did.
Yeah.
So it probably came from there. I think probably at school as well. You know, I was never very brilliant at school. I was mediocre. I could have done better had I have put in more effort, but I was bored. It wasn't my thing. I didn't really, you know, it didn't float my boat at all. But I did okay. And I think what I realised is that I knew I'd got more in me, but it was about putting me in that environment where I could flourish, you know, that thing about moving a flower into an environment where it will flourish. And once I realised that, I mean, I'd done a few jobs before I got into the banking industry, so I'd already kind of learned a little bit more about myself. And I think once I'd realised that there was more in me, it was kind of, well, yes, let's do this then, and let's get to the best position that I can be in. And I can remember vividly as well when I then joined the NHS. So I left the banking world when I had Sophie, my daughter, and then when I moved, I had a couple of years not out of work, but there was a few different jobs that I did. I was a self-employed mortgage broker for a while, and then the market crashed in 2009, and it all went a bit wrong. And so then I got a job in the NHS. And again, I can remember then very vividly remembering thinking, right, this is another career ladder. And I had to almost go to the bottom, literally had to start again and think, right, so I need to work my way back up again. But I had my eyes very fixed on goals that I wanted to get to. And did. I mean, it took me about 10 years probably to get to where I wanted to, but I did. So
I love that. I've got, so here's the other question I wrote down quickly. So you said about coaching your 20-year-old self, without going into like too much detail and picking it apart, what would some of the things that you would have been, well, you would want to coach your 20-year-old self on?
I think probably being a bit more sensible. I think I probably, you know, I wasn't very old myself really, and I probably wanted to make sure that everybody had a nice time at work, and there might have been things that we could have done a little bit differently around, like, okay, let's be sensible now, we've got a job to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, we did all get our jobs done, but I think I was too keen to please everybody. I didn't like challenge particularly. I'm still not very good. Nobody likes confrontation particularly, but I would have avoided it probably like the plague. And probably didn't prepare for things very well, particularly things like staff one-to-ones. Again, I wasn't, you know, a lot of the staff are probably older than me, so I found it quite difficult to try and support and coach these people. But I didn't really realise that's what I was doing, because it was a very, very different world then. It wasn't like it is now at all. The processy stuff I could always do. I was very, very good at all that. But I think the people side of things, I wanted to be everybody's friend, and that isn't necessarily what it's about. You know, you've got to make hard decisions sometimes. And
I love that. And again, you're right. You picked up on that's why I didn't want to sort of go on it too long. But you wouldn't be the person you are today if it's that whole thing, isn't it, about would you go and change anything, because it would ultimately potentially change what you're doing now. But anyway, that's another, we could do a whole another 20 minutes on that. So if you were to, let's fast forward a little bit, if you were to pick a moment where it's had an impact, had a real effect on your leadership journey, what would you choose? We always ask people, think about a person that's had an impact on you, or an event that's had an impact on your leadership journey, whether it be positive or negative. Like, what would you choose as a moment that's really accelerated or decelerated your journey?
I think, so as you know, I did my master's in senior leadership, and I think through that I learned so many things. I think there was lots of light bulb moments probably through that sort of 2.5 year journey. And at the time I was managing a team of, it was just 3 people. And I continued to manage and support those throughout the whole time of that. But once I'd finished my course, or during my course, probably even the things that I was learning meant that I could straight away put into practice what I was learning. And then there was one particular member of staff who went through a real personal situation during that time. And I mean, I was in tears the whole time because I was taking on her emotion. But that, again, I think that was probably one of the first times where I thought, you know, this is where I needed to be supportive to her. I needed to, you know, ensure that she had the right support to get through this situation that she was, at the same time as following processes. You know, I wanted to be able to throw my arms around her and just say, I'll have a year off and we'll pay you for the entire time, you know. It's kind of,
I want you to be my boss.
Yeah, you know, and of course we're not allowed, you know, can't do that. So that was very difficult. I mean, it was fine, it was absolutely fine. There was never any issues at all, and I'm sure she would agree that you know, she worked through it and we worked through it. But that was a tough one, I think. And I think if I hadn't have had some of the learning that I'd already experienced through my course, and that I probably would have dealt with that quite differently had I have not had that. But
I love it, and this is one of the reasons I asked you to come on as well, because again, going on and doing a master's in leadership, it's great, and I love we have great conversations about, we swapped a lot of resources, and I was really interested in what you were doing. Well, what moment did you decide to do that level of study? Like, what made you go to that? Because again, just before we jumped on, I was saying there's going to be a lot of people out there who are leveling up their leadership journey, and maybe that's one of the things they can go and do. We had Gary Ridge when we first started the podcast, so he got to global CEO and went and learned about leadership. So I love it when people have those moments. What was it for you, that moment?
I think for me, I mean, I was very lucky that I was offered the opportunity through work. It wasn't a mandatory course, but it was a course that the university were doing sort of in conjunction with the NHS at the time. And unfortunately for me, I had a line manager who saw the potential in me and was willing to put me forward for it. But at the minute that she sent me the email, would you be interested in doing this? I didn't even have to hesitate. It was just, yes, of course I would. You know, it was because looking at the layout of the course, it just looked so interesting. I knew it would fascinate me. And I've always been very, very big on personal development anyway. And I'd already done a lot of personal development by this time. So because I'm keen on that, I knew that as well as professionally developing me, it would obviously personally develop me as well. So it was a no-brainer for me to take that. But I was very lucky, and I'm very grateful that I was given that opportunity.
Fantastic. Where do you sit on I always ask people about, it's great reading books, listening to podcasts, doing study. I always challenge people to like take it off the page and own it and develop it and mold it, and don't just have that as that's how you need to do it. Verbatim, this is the model, this is how it's going to happen, and we know that's not real life. So I challenge people to make it their own, think about how it's related. So where do you sit? How did you encourage yourself or others around you to take a little bit of learning, but then make it your own and take it off the page?
I think, again, through the course I was doing, so some of it was, you read lots of theories and models around leadership, but it was about the assignments, but then putting it into practice. And I can remember there's definitely one assignment that I did where I'd overlayered 2 models don't ask me now which ones. One of them was the curve change, and I can't remember what the other one was now off the top of my head. And I got quite high marks on that because it was kind of thinking outside of the box, and it was seeing how one, literally, how one kind of overlaid and linked into the other. But it's thinking about, and again, I think my job in governance has always been, you've got to do that kind of 5 whys. Well, why is this? Why is that? What? And think outside the box a little bit more and try and understand the bigger picture and what's happening. And it's, so for me, I've always had that inquisitive mind almost. What you see in front of you, that's not the be all and end all. There could be a lot more to it. And I always remember somebody saying, because one of the jobs I had in the NHS was within the complaints department, and I always remember somebody saying there's always 3 sides to every complaint. It's not just 2-sided. There's always 3. There's always something else out there that you haven't quite thought about.
So which part of scene you're past that now? I think we'll probably cover some of the things you're going on to do near the end. We've got 5 minutes left. What sort of things are happening now that you still go back to? Because I know that you covered so much to such a detail and models and stuff. What sort of things still show up that you go, and again, we talk about light bulb moments. It's a big part of what we do at Star Development, give people those light bulb moments. What sort of light bulb moments are going off now in the roles that you've got and the people interactions and what you do in the workplace that you can always link back to the study and like your go-tos?
Yeah, okay. So I think probably a few. One is that this sort of one size doesn't fit all. So how you treat one member, so it's situational leadership. How you treat one person is going to be completely different to how you treat somebody else. And even that same person, depending on what they're going through at that particular time, what kind of day they're having, you might have to treat somebody a little bit differently. So that was always quite a big go-to. I think the biggest thing for me as well is this thing about, like, I'm not reactive, but this thing about having a 7-second rule before trigger and reaction, that's a huge thing, because whilst I'm not reactive, I'm not openly reactive because I can do that. I've got the ability to do that. But if I didn't, sometimes something might happen, and the mean girl in my head would be like, well, that's not right, and start going off on one. And then I have to be, but don't listen to that. Don't let that in. Think a day, take a step back and think about how you're going to react to this situation. And not every situation requires a reaction straight away. It's that thing about emails. You don't have to respond the second they land in your inbox. You are allowed to take time and think about how you want to respond and how you want to react and what action you want to take next. So that's quite a big thing.
Do you know, just really quickly, I saw something the other day that was almost the same, but it was almost a bit back to front. So you can put a delay on your emails being sent. And that's almost similar, isn't it? You could actually know that you're reactive. You could actually set that timer, knowing that you have that time. You're almost accountable to yourself then for having that reaction. And you can go, oh, wait a minute, I need to reframe that. Because again, how much is that a thing of people being busy and they're just reacting all the time without having that little, and like you said there, it can literally just be 7 seconds. It can be breathe in, breathe out. Let's approach this with my my human brain, not just my reactive brain.
Absolutely. And I think, again, I've always found, I want to be hugely defensive of my teams when I've been managing people. And there's been times where, somebody might have sent an email not about somebody else, but I've had to defend somebody, a member of my team, and it's very easy to get on that defense and, keyboard warrior. And there have been times where I've had to I rewrite an email several times before I send it, sleep on it and send it the next day, because, you look at it from a different perspective, and, it always works out in the end. But the initial response, it can be so dangerous to do that if you're not careful.
I think there'll be a lot of people listening to this thinking, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should be. And again, this is what the podcast is all about. People being conscious of that for the next couple of weeks to go, this does happen to me. And we talked about this, and how do we do something about it? So we've got a couple of minutes left. You doing all this study, all this real life, going through this leadership journey. We talked just before we came on about that's not the end. Like, and I also sometimes use this as my last question for some people. But what are you getting involved in now? Like, what is your next go-to thing? Because I know you're not just going to sit still, metaphorically, in this learning, because I know you're thirsty for learning and going forward. So what sort of things are you looking to do in the future now?
So for me, my plan or my idea at the moment is to do some further study and possibly even looking at doing a PhD around leadership and culture, because culture is another massive thing, and how one links to the other. And it's, for me, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. What comes first, the good leadership or the good culture? Can you have good leadership with a toxic culture? Can you, do you need to change your culture before your leadership? Kind of, how does all that fit together? But then how does that then translate into change and improvement and innovation for organisations? And I think, having had so long in the NHS, which, I'm still extremely passionate about our NHS. I wouldn't be without it at all. I'm sure lots of people wouldn't. But I feel that, it's constantly changing. It's a constant evolving journey. And how can we have that leadership and culture to support that change, not just in the NHS, but in any organisation? So I'm quite interested as to how all that connects, and then into good governance and we all want to be able to do the best for our service users, patients, whatever customers, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? And it all links into it. So I'm quite fascinated to.
I'm looking forward to our several conversations we're going to have on this. Do you know what I've just been smiling as you were saying that, because what I'm aiming for now is to have lots of discussions about culture on the podcast, so I get a reference in this PhD. That'd be awesome. Bit of name dropping going in.
It's not going to happen overnight, I can tell you that, but it's something I would like to do. So it's something that I'll start to explore. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Kerryn, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed that. 20 minutes goes really fast when I have great conversations. So ladies and gents, if you've enjoyed that, make sure you subscribe on the YouTube channel, make sure you hit follow on your podcast provider, and as ever, which bit of that episode was relevant to you? What are you going to action after it? What was your light bulb moment? How can you relate to that story? Let us know on whichever platform, social media, LinkedIn, anything like that. All the stuff over there. Let us know, YouTube channel, give us that feedback, and we'll take that on board, and I'll feed it back to Kerryn as well. So, Kerryn, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Good. And I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye.